Hi there. Thank you, truly, for clicking on this video. I know there are thousands of stories waiting to be told, and thousands more you could be listening to right now. So the fact that you're here, that you chose to spend a few quiet moments with this one, it means a lot. Maybe you're lying in bed, phone in hand, letting your mind slow down after a long day. Or maybe you're just looking for something soft, something thoughtful, something that feels human. Whatever brought you here, I'm really glad you came. Tonight's story is not fast. It doesn't shout. It doesn't try to impress you. It simply invites you in, to listen, to feel, and maybe, just maybe, to remember how much strength lives in silence. If at any point during this story you feel something, a memory, a sadness, a strange comfort, or just the urge to keep listening, then please consider leaving a like, sharing a thought in the comments, or subscribing. It helps me keep telling stories like this for listeners like you. Now, take a breath, let the noise fall away, and come with me. Back to a night so cold, even your breath could betray you. You wake up, not because you're rested, but because your body has had enough of the cold. There's no sunrise pouring in through a warm window. There's only a dim gray light leaking through the cracks of the thatched roof, its damp straws sagging like tired bones. Your back aches. Not from age, but from another night spent on a pile of damp straw. This isn't a bed. It's just the driest corner of a dirt floor. And dry is a generous word. Your breath floats upward like ghosts, thin clouds disappearing into the frozen air. You see it every morning. It's the first proof you're still alive. That, and the dull ache in your fingers as they slowly remember how to move. Numb, then prickling, then pain. Like needles under your skin. Good. Pain means circulation. Pain means you're not dead. Beside you, a baby stirs. Her blanket is a rough sackcloth that's more whole than fabric. Her tiny body curls into itself like a question mark. She doesn't cry. Not because she isn't cold, but because she's learned it doesn't change anything. Somewhere in the thatch ceiling above, a mouse skitters across the wooden beam, its claws scratching like whispers. You don't startle. You've lived with them long enough to know they're part of the house now, just like the frost along the walls, just like the mildew on your sleeves. A wind sneaks through the gaps in the daub wall. It moans softly, like the house is sighing in its sleep. You pull the blanket higher, not because it helps, but because it's what you do. Ritual is comfort. Habit is hope. Your eyes drift up. Through a tear in the straw roof, you can just make out the color of the morning, gray, the color of forgotten things. Somewhere in that haze is a sun that doesn't warm anymore, only marks the passage of time, only tells you it's another day you have to survive. And yet, you're here, still breathing, still blinking, still holding on. Somewhere deep inside, past the numb fingers and the chapped lips, is the smallest flicker of gratitude. Not joy, not even peace, just the quiet thankfulness of having opened your eyes. Because in this world, survival isn't guaranteed, not even till sunrise. The cold has taken many. It takes without mercy, without warning, without noise. But today, it didn't take you. You woke up. Cold, yes, but alive. And that somehow is enough to begin again. You might think the worst part is over once your eyes open. But in truth, it's just begun. Because now you have to live inside this house, not just survive it. Though calling it a house feels generous, it's a hut, wattle and daub, sticks, mud, straw, and hope all mashed together to keep out the world. And it tries. Really, it tries. But the wind still slips through. The cold still creeps in. The damp still clings. There is no glass on the windows. Only oiled cloth stretched over wooden frames, fluttering like tired lungs. No floorboards beneath your feet. just packed earth, hardened by years of footsteps and frozen mornings. And forget insulation. The walls are a lie of safety. They crack in silence. They bleed cold. They hold secrets of things growing where they shouldn't. Mold blooms like bruises across the corners, sometimes white, sometimes black. You don't look too closely. You don't ask if it's dangerous. You already know it is. The ceiling is low, and in some places it's lower than it used to be. The beams sag with damp and time. On quiet nights, if you can call them that, you can hear the wooden frame groan, like it's tired of holding itself up. You understand that feeling, and yet this is home. Not because it's warm, not because it's safe, but because it's what you've got. Because it's where your mother sings by the hearth. Because it's where your child sleeps, buried in straw and rags and love. There's a cradle near the wall. It rocks gently with every gust that sneaks in through the crack just above it. A drop of water, rain or melted frost you don't know, plinks down onto the wooden rim every few seconds. Plink, 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 a slow, steady rhythm, the kind that wears down even stone, eventually. You moved the cradle last week. You stuffed cloth in the gap. Still, the water finds its way. Water always does. The baby doesn't cry. Maybe she's used to it. Maybe she knows this is how life is. Or maybe she's just conserving the warmth, even in her breath. A chicken lets out a sharp, startled cluck from the corner where it sleeps under an upturned basket, probably the cold again. Or the rats. Yes, there are rats. And mice. And roaches. You stopped fighting them years ago. They are not invaders anymore. They are cohabitants. Some of them even have names, if only to make it easier when you curse them at night. You sometimes wonder, what would it be like to live in a house with rooms? With a door that seals tight? With walls that don't weep and floors that don't freeze? But then you look across the room. Your mother sits by the hearth, what's left of it. A fire long since turned to ash still smolders faintly, enough to glow but not enough to warm. Her hands are wrapped in cloth, not gloves, just cloth. Her fingers move slowly, mending something, a shirt maybe, or just pretending to. She hums, not a tune, just a note, over and over, a lullaby for no one, or maybe for the house itself, trying to hold it together. In the silence between her breaths, you hear everything else. The shifting of the wind outside, the creak of wood above, the sound of something small scurrying near your foot, and still, this is home. There is a kind of peace in the knowing, a kind of sorrow too, but it's soft. It doesn't scream. It just settles around you like the dust in the corners. Always there, always waiting. You walk toward the hearth. Each step presses into the dirt floor, leaving nothing behind. No footprints, no mark that you were ever here. Just warmth, maybe, in the space you leave behind. If you're lucky. You crouch next to your mother. She doesn't look up. She doesn't have to. You don't speak. You both know there's nothing new to say, nothing to fix, nothing to dream of that wouldn't break your heart. You just sit, together, in this hut, in this cold, in this life. And somewhere outside, the wind howls again. But it sounds almost like laughter. The hardest part about surviving the cold isn't always the cold itself. It's the way it hides inside things you can't see, like the very air you breathe. You learn early that winter doesn't just bite at your fingers or numb your toes. It creeps in deeper, quieter. It rides on your breath, waiting for the moment your guard slips. One careless inhale, one gasp too sharp. That's all it takes. There's a reason the old ones whisper warnings about the wind. They say it carries sickness, that if you breathe in too deep on a frosty morning, the cold will curl into your lungs and never leave. Not until you're coughing up blood, hunched in a corner, wrapped in every blanket you own, and still cold. Some call it superstition, but you've seen it. You've heard it. At night, when the fire dies and the hut goes still, there's a sound that's more terrifying than any howl outside. A cough. Not the dry kind from dust or straw. Not the little clearing of a throat, but deep, wet, rattling. Like something inside has broken loose and is trying to claw its way out. The first time you heard it from your grandfather, you didn't understand. You thought he was just clearing his throat. But the cough came again the next night, and the next, until it didn't come at all. Because in this place, silence often follows sickness. So now, even the children know the rules. You don't breathe through your mouth, not when it's this cold. You tie cloth around your face, even if it's damp, even if it smells of smoke and sweat. Anything to warm the air before it hits your chest. You breathe slowly, always slowly, as if each inhale is a negotiation with death. The little girl in the cradle sleeps now with a strip of linen tucked gently over her nose. Not too tight, just enough to hold a pocket of warmth. Her mother checks it often, adjusting it with fingers that tremble not from cold, but from fear. She lost a child last winter. That baby had been healthy, laughing even. Until one morning, she started coughing. By the next night, the laughter was gone. The silence that followed has never really left the room. So now every child wears cloth. Every old woman mutters blessings into the air, hoping it wraps itself around the lungs of those they love. And when someone coughs now, just once, even lightly, every head turns, every body tenses. The fire is stoked, the herbs are brought out. Someone hums a prayer under their breath. It's strange, isn't it? How something so invisible can hold so much power. Air, breath. The thing we cannot live without, and yet, here, it's the very thing that might kill you. So you lie in your corner, wrapped in every rag you own, mouth shut tight, nose covered in wool. You breathe through the fabric, through the fear. And in the darkness, someone coughs again. You don't ask who. You don't want to know. Because knowing makes it real. And tonight, you just need to believe that everyone will still be breathing come morning. There are kings in castles, crowned in gold and robed in velvet. But here, in this hut, the only true king wears a cloak of flame. Fire doesn't sit on a throne. It crouches low in the hearth, flickering, whispering, holding court in shadows and sparks. Every pair of eyes in the house watches it, not for beauty, but for survival. Because if fire dies, everything dies with it. There is no greater terror than waking to cold ashes. That's why someone always stays awake. Always. They call it banking the fire. A quiet ritual passed down through generations. You pile ash around the embers, smothering it gently, not to extinguish, but to cradle. Like tucking in a sleeping child, carefully, reverently, just enough to keep it breathing until dawn, but it's not always enough. Sometimes the ash is too thick. Sometimes the wood is too damp. Sometimes someone blinks too long and sleep steals them away. And when they wake, it's too late. There was a winter not long ago when old Mara fell asleep by the fire. She'd watched it every night for 30 years. Whispered her prayers into its smoke, sang to it when the wind howled too loud, but that night, her eyes were too tired, her back too sore, the fire too small. She woke coughing, only it wasn't from sickness, it was from smoke, not the gentle scent of burning pine, but thick, choking blackness. The thatch had caught, the corner of the hut was alight. The child sleeping nearest to it never woke again. Since then, no one dares trust the fire alone. Now, fire is not just heat, it's hunger. It needs feeding, watching, soothing. It's a creature, alive and powerful, and easily angered. Wood is gathered like treasure. Twigs, branches, even old furniture, nothing is spared. If it burns, it's saved. Dried in corners, hidden from damp, counted like coins. Ashes are sifted for coals. Coals are wrapped in cloth to light the next fire. Nothing is wasted, nothing is taken for granted. Even the children know the rules. Don't run near the hearth. Don't let the straw touch the flame. Don't ever fall asleep before the fire is safe. And yet, every night, someone sits beside it. Tonight, it's the youngest boy, no older than 10. His knees pulled to his chest, his eyes wide and unblinking. He watches the embers as if they're telling a story only he can hear. He knows if the fire dies, the frost will creep in. It will wrap around his sister's lungs. It will slip under the blankets. It will wait. So he pokes the coals, adds a twig, blows softly, and when the flame flutters back to life, he smiles, not with joy, but with relief. Across the room, the others sleep, or try to. No one sleeps deeply in winter. Even in dreams, they listen, for the crackle of flame, for the whisper of smoke, for the sigh of warmth that means the king is still alive. And somewhere in the dark, someone murmurs a prayer, not to God, but to the fire itself. Let it live. Please, let it live. Sleep in this place is not a luxury. It's a strategy, a shield against the cold. No one stretches out. No one sprawls. There's no such thing as space. The idea of sleeping alone is not comforting. It's unthinkable. Because warmth doesn't come from blankets. It comes from bodies, from breath, from pressing in so tightly against one another that you no longer know where one heartbeat ends and another begins. The bed is not a bed. It's a pile of straw, musty, flattened, laced with the scent of animals and years, laid atop wooden slats, sometimes not even that. The ground, if you're unlucky, but it's not the straw that matters. It's who lies on it. 5, sometimes 7, more in a bad storm. A mother, a father, 3 children, a grandparent, a cousin visiting for the season, all curled in like spoons in a wooden bowl. Then come the animals. A chicken tucked beneath the mother's arm. A piglet snoring softly near a child's feet. A calf, still young, still small, wedged against the wall, its great eyes blinking slowly in the firelight. They are not guests. They are part of the family, brought in not from kindness but from necessity. Because a chicken's body carries heat. Because a pig's snout pressed into your belly might be the only thing standing between you and frostbite. Even the breath of a cow, heavy and warm and damp, becomes sacred when it melts the ice in the air. There's a rhythm to it all. Breaths rise and fall together. A baby stirs. The mother pulls her closer, one hand still resting on the chicken's feathers. The father shifts. The pig snorts in protest. Someone murmurs in their sleep, a prayer or a dream, and beneath it all, the sound of chewing, slow, methodical. The calf, munching on dry hay pulled from the same corner every night. No one minds. It's comforting in its way, familiar, reassuring, a sign that life still stirs in the dark. There are no secrets in sleep, no privacy. Your elbow is in someone's ribs. Someone's knee is under your back. The child beside you drools onto your shoulder and you let her, because tonight she's warm and tomorrow she might not be. A little boy wraps his arms around the piglet like a toy. He doesn't know he's holding his own shield against the cold. He just loves the way its ears twitch when he whispers. In the far corner, the grandmother mumbles. Not words, just soft sounds. A lullaby she sang once, or perhaps still sings in her mind. No one complains. Not about the smell, not about the tightness, not about the sharp straw poking through worn linens. Because when the wind outside howls like a wolf without a pack, you don't ask for comfort. You ask for survival. And survival means sharing everything: your breath, your warmth, your sleep. And maybe, in that closeness, in the way bodies become boundaries against death, there's something tender, something ancient, a kind of love that doesn't speak, that doesn't need words, just one hand reaching for another under the same tattered blanket. Just the weight of a chicken's body rising and falling in time with your own. Just the quiet sigh of a child, warm and safe for now, as the cold rages just inches away. The fire may guard your breath, and the bodies may hold you close, but it's the belly that holds the last line between you and the frost. Before sleep, before blankets are tugged up and straw is fluffed, there is a ritual even older than prayers. The feeding, not for pleasure, not for fullness, but for survival. In this house, dinner is armor, each spoonful a tiny shield against the creeping cold. The pot hangs above the fire, blackened by years, its contents humble, barley thickened with a scrap of fat, a crust of bread softened in water, turnips boiled until they surrender to mush. No one asks what's for supper. The answer is always the same: whatever was still edible when the sun went down. Tonight it's thick porridge, salted lard, and a piece of yesterday's bread that has gone too hard to chew unless soaked. The mother lifts the spoon, steaming and slow, and feeds the youngest first. The child leans forward like a bird, mouth open, eyes glazed with sleep. Another spoonful, and another. Her hand doesn't stop, not until the boy's belly is full, not until his eyelids flutter and his body slumps against her chest. She moves to the next child and the next. The father doesn't eat yet. He watches the bowl, watches the little ones eat, watches his wife's face, not tired, not resigned, but focused, like this is her craft, her duty, her spell to keep death outside the door. She ladles a final scoop for herself, not the best part, not the last piece of meat which she saved for the boy who coughed through the afternoon. Just warm broth, thick and oily, sliding down her throat like melted hope. And then, only then, does the father eat. What's left is not much. A few grains, a corner of bread so hard it must be softened between his teeth, like a stone being forgiven. But it warms him, just enough. Enough to make it through the night. They don't speak much during dinner. Talking wastes breath. Laughter opens mouths too wide. And warmth, once escaped, is hard to call back. So they eat in silence. Even the children, once full, lean against their mother's side and drift into that in-between world where dreams grow from empty stomachs and quiet love. In one corner, the grandmother keeps her portion tucked in her lap, not eating it yet, saving it. She always does. For later, she says. But everyone knows there's no later. She'll wake in the darkest hour and slip the crust into a grandchild's hand when hunger rumbles louder than sleep. She's done it for years. No one stops her. No one thanks her. Because this is how love speaks here. Not with words. Not with gifts. But with meat handed over in silence. With a mother who waits until the children are sleeping to eat. With a father who chews slowly, making the moment last because the taste is all he'll carry into sleep. Outside, the wind scratches the walls. Inside, the pot swings gently, empty now, save for a trace of warmth clinging to its sides. That warmth will cool, but for a few hours, the heat lives on in the bellies of those who matter most. And sometimes, that's all you need. Cleanliness might be next to godliness elsewhere, but not here, not now, not in the dead of winter, when the cold listens for foolish pride like a predator waiting for a cracked door. Here, dirt is sacred, layers of it, months of it. You don't bathe in December. You don't wash your hair when the frost clings to the inside of the walls. You don't scrub your skin raw just to feel fresh. Because freshness is a luxury, and luxury is how people die. The old woman says it best. Clean people die first, she mutters, stuffing straw into the cracks between the door and its warped frame. You scrub the warmth right off your bones. It's not just dirt. It's insulation. The oil from cooking, the sweat from labor, the grime from days crawling under carts and tending to fires. It all forms a kind of armor. A second skin. Not pleasant, not perfumed, but protective. You've seen what happens to those who try to stay civilized. A visiting priest once insisted on bathing every third day. By the second week of frost, he was coughing up more prayers than breath. By the third, they buried him with lavender in his hands. There's a local tale passed between children with wide eyes and crooked grins. They say the cold witch, the one with icicles for hair and fingers like glass, stalks the clean. She sniffs them out. The scent of soap is her bell. The gleam of bare skin her lantern. If she finds you freshly scrubbed and soft, she slips inside while you sleep and steals the warmth from your lungs. So, children roll in the mud before dusk. They rub ash on their arms. One boy even smeared chicken fat behind his ears last week. His mother sighed but said nothing. Because she remembers. She remembers a time when she thought cold could be conquered with a clean shirt. That was the night she lost 2 toes. Now, she buttons her stiff tunic over skin that hasn't seen water in weeks. The fabric holds shape from sheer accumulation, dirt, grease, memory. You could stand the shirt up in a corner and it wouldn't fall. The little girl beside her plays with clumps of soil like toys. She pats them flat and lines them up like soldiers. Her cheeks are smudged but warm. Her nose runs, but not from fever. She is, in all her filth, alive. They say that even lice go dormant in the deepest winter, maybe out of mercy. Maybe even parasites understand that this season offers no feast. The bed, if you can call it that, smells like old onions and damp fur. But it is warm, and when bodies press together inside it, the mingled odors become something familiar. Something safe. The young wife used to cry about the smell, used to scrub her hands raw, trying to hold on to some sense of grace. Now, she runs her fingers through her husband's matted hair with quiet acceptance. This is not the season for shame. The shame would kill you. Because shame means trying to hide, trying to escape, trying to be better than the earth you came from. But dirt is what keeps you here, keeps you warm, keeps you real. So no one washes, not yet, not until the thaw, not until the birds return, not until the cold witch has gone back to wherever it is she waits, hungry for the next clean soul who dares to shine. And when that day comes, when water no longer bites, they will bathe. They will scrub until skin peeks through again. They will burn old clothes and sew new ones from spring's first wool, but not now. Now, the brown crust on their sleeves is as sacred as any blanket. The streaks of soot on their cheeks, a badge of survival. And if someone laughs at the smell, they laugh too. Because if you can still stink, you can still breathe. And if you can still breathe, you can make it to morning. Night doesn't fall gently here. It descends with purpose, like a heavy curtain drawn across the sky by hands too tired for mercy. And when it does, the house shifts. It breathes differently. It listens. Because sleep is not just rest. It's a ritual, a negotiation with the cold. The first signal is the silence. When even the chickens stop complaining and the children stop asking questions. The embers are stirred one last time, not to revive the fire, but to remember it. Someone, usually the oldest, shifts through the ash with a stick, looking for the glow that still pulses beneath. It's not much, but it's enough. Stones are taken from near the fire, wrapped in rags, and slid carefully into beds. These stones are ancient in their own way, not because of age, but because of purpose. Each one has held the heat of hundreds of nights. Each one a quiet promise that warmth can return. The children know this dance. They watch it every evening like a story retold. A boy presses his fingers into the soft soot near the hearth, draws a circle, and places the warmest stone in the center. His sister follows, covering it with a threadbare cloth before whispering something under her breath. It is not a prayer, not exactly, but not quite anything else either. Then the lights dim, not by switch, but by flame. Candles are few. Wax is precious. 1 wick per night, no more. And as the room fades into amber and shadow, the voices begin. Not loud, never loud. The old woman starts, her voice cracked and smoky, like the timbers above them. She recites the lines she learned as a child, when her own mother sat where she sits now. Bless the roof that stayed, the fire that burned, the hands that gave, and the cold that didn't win. Others join in, not always in harmony, but in rhythm, a beat formed by years of repetition. Even the youngest mouths the words, though he doesn't yet understand them. He will one day, especially the last part. If the fire lives till morning, we live too. It's more than saying goodnight. It's leaving instructions behind, just in case. Pots are emptied, cloths dampened to smother sparks. The door is checked for wind, and then the beds. No one sleeps alone. Even the quietest child knows better. They press against each other like spoons in a drawer, the space between them sacred, not for privacy, but for heat. Elbows digging. Toes tangle. Breath smells foul, no one complains. The father tucks a hen beneath the covers near his legs. The mother curls around the baby like a question mark. The old woman holds her rosary so tight the wood leaves impressions in her palm. Outside, the wind moans, not as a threat, but as a reminder. It's still waiting. Always is. Inside, breath slows. The candle dies with a hiss that sounds almost like relief. And in that darkness, just before sleep, someone whispers the words again, not because they forgot, but because it feels wrong not to. If the fire lives till morning, the reply is soft, maybe from a dream. We live too. The fire had dwindled to a faint glow, a pulsing ember beneath a small mound of ash. The air inside the hut was heavy, not with warmth, but with a stillness so complete that it pressed on the lungs. Outside, the wind groaned low through the cracks in the daub walls, like a beast pacing the edges of sleep. And then, silence. Morning. No rooster crowed. No baby cried. Only the sound of frozen straw crackling beneath someone's shifting weight, and the distant creak of wood contracting from the cold. A woman stirred. Her bones ached. Her back was stiff from sleeping upright against the hearth. She had wrapped herself around the infant all night, her shawl stretched thin to cover both their bodies. The child had been quiet, but she'd taken that as a blessing. After days of coughing and whimpering, perhaps he'd finally found rest. Her hands, cracked and raw, reached to draw him closer, and then stopped. There is a kind of stillness that tells you more than touch, the kind where breath doesn't fog the air, where small limbs don't resist, don't twitch, don't warm to your closeness. She didn't scream, not at first, just held him, long enough to pretend, long enough to pray she was wrong, long enough to imagine the cold had merely borrowed him for a moment. But the cold doesn't give things back. When the scream came, it was ragged and hollow. It didn't rise. It sank. It filled the hut like smoke, curling into the corners, clinging to the sleeping forms of the others. The father awoke first, then the eldest daughter, then the boy. All stared, all understood. Grief moved quietly in these homes. It didn't wail or thrash, it crouched. It pressed its forehead to the earth and wept into the silence. They wrapped him in linen, not because it was custom, but because the cloth was clean and dry, and in this house that made it holy, there would be no priest. The path to the chapel was buried in snow. There would be no procession, just the family walking slowly, one foot in front of the other, until the trees opened wide enough to take him. The ground was too hard to dig, so they didn't. Instead, they built a cairn of stones, each rock laid down by a hand that trembled, that bled. The mother placed his shoe atop the mound. It was small, worn, stitched with love. And in the days that followed, they did not speak of it. They fed the animals, they banked the fire, they mended the roof, but the silence grew teeth. And at night, when the wind moaned, it sounded like a lullaby gone wrong. The kind that ends before the final note, the kind that leaves you reaching for someone who isn't there. This is how the cold wins, not with fury, but with forgetting, with making you numb enough to stop noticing who's gone. But in the stillness, in the dark, the mother would sometimes place her hand over her chest, close her eyes and listen for the beat that once echoed beside hers. A beat stilled too soon, and she would remember. Always she would remember. They called it survival, but not all who survived remained whole. The cold didn't always kill. Sometimes it just took small pieces of you, quietly, permanently. There was a boy once, barely 12, whose fingers turned black before anyone noticed. He hadn't even cried, just clenched his fists under the hay and kept them there, night after night, because he didn't want to wake his mother. By the time they unwrapped the cloth, it was too late. 3 fingers gone. The silence he kept after that was louder than any scream. In houses like these, people counted fingers like years. 4 winters, still got both ears? Lucky. 7 winters? Lost a toe and your laughter? Still breathing, still a win? The man who sat by the fire every morning used to be a mason. He told stories, once. Now he just sat with a shawl over his eyes, because the frost had taken them. Not instantly. It had started with blurred shapes, then burning pain, and then nothing. They said he stared at the flame as if he was trying to see what it looked like one last time. He hadn't spoken in 3 years. Sometimes the children whispered about him, but not too loud, because every time he shifted, every time he turned his head slightly as if listening, it reminded them that silence could be watching too. Children grew up too fast here. Their eyes carried winters older than their bodies. No fairy tales. Just warnings. Don't lick the icicles. Don't fall asleep near the door. Don't breathe too hard. It'll crack your chest. They played games with sticks and mud, but only inside. Because outside, the cold didn't care if you were young. It would sit on your chest, press into your lungs, and leave you gasping like an old man. Mothers wrapped their babies in layers of wool and fear. Every cough was a countdown. Every fever a question without answer. Sometimes when the wind howled too long through the cracks, people forgot things, words, names, themselves. They called it winter mind. The way thoughts would vanish like footprints in snow. A woman once forgot her own son's face for a full day. When she remembered, she cried, not from joy, but from fear of what else might disappear next. And still, they endured, not because it got easier, but because something in them refused to break completely. They patched their wounds with silence. They carried their losses like stones in a pocket, heavy but familiar. They didn't talk about pain. They just shared fire. An old man once said, "You don't need all your fingers to hold someone." And he smiled with 3 left. That was how you knew who had lived through the hardest nights. They didn't talk about it. They just kept showing up at the fire, eyes hollow, hearts full, and hands that still remembered how to hold. There were no books here, no parchments on survival, no manuals for how to keep a child alive when the wind howls and the fire dies. But there was knowledge, whispered, worn, passed down not with words, but with hands. You learned to survive by watching, by listening to the soft rustle of a grandmother's breath as she reached into the ashes, feeling for heat where none could be seen. She didn't speak as she did it. She simply took your small hand in hers and pressed it toward the coals, close enough to feel, far enough not to burn. "That's where the life hides," she'd murmur, "beneath what looks dead." Fire wasn't started. It was protected, banked deep under ash with the reverence of something sacred. A single ember could mean the difference between warmth and a grave. Children were taught to speak softly around the hearth, to never shout, never stomp near it, as if disturbing the fire's sleep might offend the gods themselves. There was a stone, black, smooth, always warm, tied with cloth and pressed to the belly of the smallest child each night. It wasn't magic. It was memory. The memory of a mother who once learned that warm blood moves slower when the skin is cold, so she wrapped her child's heat around stone and prayer. Boys weren't taught how to hunt first. They were taught how to stack the wood so it wouldn't rot, how to line it against the east wall to catch the sunrise, how to smell mold before it spread. "Dead wood won't burn," an old uncle said once, spitting into the wind. "Just like a dead man won't sing." There were layers to every lesson, to walk the same path every morning, so the snow knew your name, to check the ceiling beams for drips. Not because water was the enemy, but because water meant rot, and rot meant collapse. To sleep with your back to the wind and your face toward the light. No one told these lessons with drama. They came out quiet, folded into chores, like secrets in soup. A mother cutting cloth for a patch might say, "Don't ever wear wet wool, it holds death." A father pointing at a cracked bowl might mutter, "Fix it now." Cold doesn't wait for anyone. Even play was practice. Children built miniature homes from sticks and straw, tested them against their breath like little frost gods. If it fell in the wind, it wouldn't last a night. If it stood, they smiled. Not for fun, but for future. One winter, a child found a bird with a broken wing. Instead of weeping, she wrapped it in cloth and placed it beside the firestone at her belly. No one told her to do it, but everyone understood. Because that's what the frost had taught them. You don't survive alone. You survive by remembering. Remembering which berries don't kill, which animals give warmth even in death, which walls to lean against when you cry so your breath doesn't echo too loud. Some nights, you could hear the older ones muttering to themselves, not prayers, but reminders. Toes first, then hands, then breath. Like a mantra, like a rhythm, like the beat of a heart that had made it through one more night. There were no schools here, just elders who didn't speak unless the fire was low and the dark was deep. And when they did, everyone listened, because their words were more than words. They were instructions, maps, warnings carved in silence. And in a world where the cold never slept, that was the closest thing they had to scripture. Love wasn't something people said aloud here. There wasn't breath to waste on soft confessions or poetic phrases, not when the air itself bit back, not when the frost crept under the doorframe like a thief with no face. But love lived, not in words, in blankets, in bowls, in silence. You saw it when the mother wrapped another layer of cloth around the baby, even if it meant her own skin met the cold. When the father leaned his back into the hole in the wall where the wind whispered, shielding the rest from the chill. When an older sister gave away the last crust of bread to a younger one who had cried herself to sleep the night before. No one asked, no one thanked, but they all knew. That was the kind of love winter demanded. Not grand, not poetic, but enduring. It showed up in the fire that never fully died, in the pot of stew that always held just enough, even when there was almost nothing, in the way people fell asleep back to back, sharing warmth through skin and trust. One night, the roof began to leak. Not water, ice. Sharp and sudden, slicing down like a silver knife. The father moved without a word. He didn't shout, didn't curse the hole. He simply spread his arms above his child's sleeping body, taking the cold in place of her dreams. In the morning, his shoulders ached. He coughed blood into the snow. But the child didn't know. She just woke up warm. And the mother, she never slept. While the others drifted into restless dreams, she sat upright beside the fire, feeding it piece by piece. A splinter of wood, a shredded basket handle, a lock of her own cut hair when nothing else was dry enough to burn. She wasn't trying to be heroic. She was just being a mother, which, in this world, was the same thing. This love wasn't loud. It didn't sing. It wrapped itself around the fragile things and held them steady, like hands cupped around a candle in a windstorm. Sometimes, the children would wake at night, not from nightmares, but from the fear of silence. Silence meant the fire had gone out. Silence meant something had ended. And a voice, soft and cracked from age, would whisper through the dark, "It's all right. I'm still here." That was enough. That was love. No one gave gifts in this place, but they gave everything else. A portion of stew when there was only enough for one. A threadbare scarf passed from neck to neck, day to day. A hand, calloused and cracked, placed on a forehead just to check for fever. And there were hugs, not for comfort, but for heat. You didn't cry in them. You didn't speak in them. You just held on, because if you didn't, you'd forget you were real. Love was in the way people noticed. When someone's fingers turned too blue. When someone's voice turned too quiet. When someone hadn't smiled in 3 days. There were no doctors here, no potions for grief. But there were warm hands, shared silence, and the kind of kindness that grew like moss on stone, slow, small, but impossible to kill. Sometimes, the children would draw hearts in the frost on the windows, not because they knew what love meant, but because they felt it, around them, in them, even when the world outside was made of ice, and when the storms roared and the snow piled high and the nights lasted longer than days. They survived. Not because they were strong, not because they were brave, but because someone had loved them enough to stay awake, to give up warmth, to hold the roof in place when everything else tried to tear it away. That was the kind of love that didn't melt, it didn't shatter, it didn't fade, it survived. There's a fire somewhere near you now. It might be a heater's hum, quiet and forgettable, or the soft warmth of a blanket you didn't need to fight for. Maybe just the gentle glow of your screen, keeping the night at bay. But that fire didn't begin with you. It began with hands you'll never hold, with names no one remembers, with backs bent over ash and smoke, with breath caught in frozen air, trying desperately not to let the last ember die. You're not here by accident. You are the result of 1,000 quiet choices. To stay awake when sleep meant death. To pass food to a child and go hungry. To wrap one more layer of cloth over a newborn's chest and whisper, "Breathe." Your ancestors weren't kings. They weren't poets. They didn't build monuments or win battles anyone sings about. But they kept the fire. And that is why you exist. Somewhere in a hut with mud for walls and smoke for a ceiling, someone once shivered through the night so their daughter could live. Someone cupped their hands around a flame, not knowing it would one day warm the hands of a child generations later. You don't remember them, but the blood in your body does. It hums with their cold mornings and sleepless nights. It pulses with their sacrifices. They didn't have books or names carved in stone, but they had purpose, to make sure the light didn't go out. They didn't ask for thanks. They wouldn't have known what to do with it. But you can remember, in your silence, in your stillness, in the way you sit a little longer by the fire, knowing someone once sat longer than they should have, just to make sure you could. There are stories you'll never hear, because they were never told, only lived. The woman who held her child's fingers all night, even as frost bit her own. The boy who ran barefoot to find dry wood before the snow sealed the door. The man who swallowed his scream when the fire burned too low and hope went with it. They aren't ghosts, they're your foundation. And when you complain that the room is too cold or the night too long, remember? They had nights without end. They had cold without mercy. And still, they lit the flame again, and again, and again. Your warm bed is not just comfort, it's legacy. It's a gift passed hand to hand, through ash and time. Someone died so you could sleep, not in war, but in quiet, holding on just long enough for spring to return. And when you breathe deeply tonight, when you curl beneath a blanket someone else sewed, when you close your eyes in peace, know this: that fire is not yours alone. It was given to you. Guard it well. And if the day ever comes when the cold creeps in again, keep it. Pass it on. Because that's what they did. For you. Somewhere in the quiet, when the fire has burned low and the wind no longer claws at the door, you begin to feel them. Not with your hands, not with your eyes, but somewhere deeper, where warmth settles and silence speaks. They're not standing behind you. They're not ghosts in the way you were taught to fear. They're more like echoes in the flame, footsteps you can't hear but still believe. Old souls. They don't wear crowns. They don't float above you with wings or glory. They sleep beneath fields you've never walked, in earth that forgot their names but never their warmth. They're the reason you're still breathing, not because they were strong, not because they never fell, but because even in their falling, they left you something to rise from. They live through winters the world has long since buried. And when the cold took too much, a finger, a voice, a child, they didn't curse the wind. They just kept going. And now they rest. You owe them nothing. And yet, everything. No one built statues for them. No poems carry their names. But if you've ever lit a candle on a dark night and stared into it, wondering what it means to be alive, you've met them. They are the warmth in your wondering, the hush in your breath, the flicker that never quite goes out. Tonight, before the last ember folds into ash, say thank you. Not aloud, not for show, just in that quiet way the soul knows how, with a pause, with a stillness, with a breath that doesn't rush to end. Let your chest rise gently. Let your eyes soften. Let the world outside your window disappear and whisper to the dark, "Sleep well, old souls. You've earned your rest. I'm here now because you stayed then." The wind may still blow, the frost may still come, but tonight you're warm. And somewhere, in the deepest hush of winter, they are smiling. Not because they're remembered, but because you're alive. And that was always enough. Thank you for staying, for letting this story find a place in your evening, in your thoughts, in that quiet corner of yourself where the world softens. If it moved you, if it reminded you of strength, of silence, of someone you love, then I'm grateful. feel free to leave a thought in the comments, or maybe just a candle emoji for the old souls, for the warmth they left behind. And if you'd like to walk with me through more forgotten paths, more gentle histories that whisper instead of shout, you're always welcome here. A like, a comment, a subscribe. They help me keep this fire going. But truly, your presence already means more than you know. So sleep well tonight. And when you wake, remember, you carry stories too. Good night.